The truth about the Emperor's prisoners beneath Terra was never meant to reach your ears. I am Interrogator Malchus Rowe, and I was sent to the deepest levels under the Imperial Palace, to places unmarked on any official map. The air grows colder as you descend, carrying the scent of ancient metal and forgotten pain. The custodians who guide me never blink, never speak beyond terse commands. They bring me to cells that hum with psychic resonance, where inmates sit who have not aged in 10,000 years. My assignment seems simple: record their confessions. But as I interview a prisoner who whispers of knowing the Emperor personally, the walls of reality begin to crack around me. Each testimony unravels everything I believed about the Imperium's history. Too late, I realize the empty cell waiting at the end of the hall was never meant for them. What happens to those who learn truths the Emperor himself decided mankind must never know? I was not meant to return from the depths beneath the Imperial Palace. That much is clear to me now. My name is Malchus Rowe, Interrogator of the Holy Inquisition, and this recording serves as both confession and warning. Should it reach the upper echelons, know that I acted with pure faith and devotion to our God Emperor. Perhaps that was my first mistake. The assignment came through unusual channels, not from my Inquisitor, but from a representative of the Adeptus Custodes, a golden giant who spoke with such quiet authority that my usual suspicions fell silent. The orders, he claimed, originated from the High Lords themselves, though I noticed he never specified which ones. A rare honor, he called it. A sacred duty to record the confessions of the Emperor's oldest prisoners, those sealed away since the Great Heresy. Testimonies that would complete certain historical records and strengthen the Imperium. I remember how his eyes never blinked as he spoke, how his massive form remained unnaturally still, like a statue granted temporary life. I was permitted no weapons, no vox beads, nothing but a single data slate with encryption that exceeded anything I had encountered in my 17 years of Imperial service. The slate itself felt wrong against my fingers, as if the metal were slightly too warm, slightly too responsive to my touch. But such thoughts I dismissed as the natural apprehension of a man about to descend beyond the known boundaries of the Imperial Palace, into levels unmarked on any official schematic. My escort consisted of 3 custodians who did not offer their names or speak beyond terse directions. Down we went, through security checkpoints of increasing stringency, past servitors whose augmentations were unlike any I had seen before. Their eyes tracked our movement with too much awareness, their mechanics operating with a silence that suggested technologies beyond standard Imperial issue. The air grew stale, then sweet, then acrid as we descended, each level bringing a new atmosphere, a new pressure against my eardrums. I tried to maintain my mental map, a habit ingrained through inquisitorial training. 312 steps down the first stairwell, 47 paces along a corridor lined with statues whose faces had been meticulously removed. Another descent, this time via a grav lift that hummed a single unbroken note which caused my teeth to ache. I lost count after that, and I suspect that was by design. The journey itself was part of the ritual, disorienting by careful intent. The final door required all 3 custodians to place their hands upon separate panels, while speaking words in a language that hurt my ears. Not Low Gothic, not High Gothic, certainly not the bastardized battle cant of the Adeptus Astartes. Something older. The syllables seemed to bend the light around their lips. The chamber beyond defied Imperial architectural norms. No flying buttresses or vaulted ceilings, no devotional imagery or purity seals. The space was circular, with 27 doors arranged around its circumference. The floor was not stone or metal, but something that absorbed sound and light in equal measure, making each step feel isolated from reality. At the center stood a simple chair and table, both carved from a pale material that resembled bone, but could not possibly be so large or perfect in its construction. "You will sit," said one of my golden escorts. "You will listen. You will record. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not approach the containment fields. You will not make physical contact with any prisoner. You will not reference any prisoner by name in your recordings or your thoughts." The last instruction struck me as odd. How could they monitor my thoughts? But I nodded my compliance. "Prisoner 17 will be brought first," said another custodian, his voice indistinguishable from the first. "The interview may commence when the tone sounds." They left me then, their massive forms moving with impossible lightness through one of the doors. I seated myself at the table, arranged my data slate, and waited. The silence pressed against me with physical weight. I found myself acutely aware of my own heartbeat, the soft rustle of my robes, the gentle click as I swallowed. My chronometer indicated I waited for precisely 43 minutes, though it felt simultaneously longer and shorter. When the door opposite my position opened, I expected to see another custodian escorting the prisoner. Instead, a figure entered alone, unbound, and apparently unguarded. This immediately struck me as wrong. No prisoner, especially one allegedly held since the heresy, should walk freely. Yet there he was, a man of unremarkable height with a scholar's slight build, dressed in simple grey robes that might have belonged to a low-ranking administratum clerk. His face was the first true shock. He appeared no older than 30 standard Terran years, with clear eyes and unmarred skin. 10,000 years of imprisonment should have left some mark, even accounting for juvenile treatments. But more disconcerting was his expression, a placid smile that spoke of absolute certainty. Not the fevered confidence of the fanatic, but the quiet assurance of someone who has seen his predictions fulfilled countless times. He sat across from me without invitation, folding his hands neatly on the table. His fingers were long and clean, the nails perfectly trimmed. No calluses, no scars, not even the subtle discoloration that comes with age. "Interrogator Malchus Rowe," he said, his voice carrying the barest hint of an accent I could not place. "I have looked forward to meeting you." I felt a chill at his use of my name, which had not been shared with him. "I am here to record your testimony," I replied, activating my data slate. He nodded, that same infuriating smile never wavering. "Yes, my confession. One of many I have given over the millennia, though yours is the first in, nearly 3,000 years. I wonder what prompted this renewed interest." I followed protocol, beginning with the formal identification. "State your designation for the record." "You may call me 17 as they do," he replied, "though that is not my name. Names have power, interrogator. Especially old ones. State your crimes against the God Emperor and the Imperium of man." At this, his smile widened fractionally. "Ah, well, that would depend entirely on which version of history you subscribe to. In the current iteration, I believe I am guilty of heresy, sedition, attempted assassination of the Emperor, conspiracy with Xenos entities, and possession of forbidden knowledge." He leaned forward slightly. "Would you like to know which of those is true?" I kept my expression neutral, though something in his manner disturbed me deeply. "I am here to record, not to judge." "A convenient position." 17 tilted his head. "Very well, I will confess to the only crime that matters. I knew him before." "Before what?" "Before he was Emperor. Before Terra was united, before the Great Crusade, before he gathered the Primarchs, before he was a god." Each sentence was delivered with precise emphasis, watching my reaction carefully. I knew him when he had a name that could be spoken aloud. Blasphemy, of course. The ravings of a madman or a dedicated heretic. Yet something in his tone, in the utter lack of zealotry, gave his words a terrible weight. "The official record states that the Emperor revealed himself in the Age of Strife," I said carefully. 17 laughed, a gentle sound like wind through autumn leaves. "The official record? Yes. Tell me, interrogator, how many official records have you seen rewritten during your service? How many inconvenient truths erased? How many heroes reimagined as traitors when political winds shift?" I did not answer. Such questions bordered on treasonous themselves. The Emperor walked among humanity for thousands of years before revealing himself, 17 continued. "This much is permitted even in your carefully sanitized histories. What they do not tell you is that he was not alone. There were others who shared portions of his gifts, his foresight, a brotherhood of sorts, though that term suggests more harmony than often existed. You claim to be one of these individuals. I kept my tone skeptical, though my pulse had quickened. No, 17 replied, looking momentarily sad. I was merely a student, an observer, a chronicler, much like yourself. He gestured to my data slate. I recorded their debates, their plans, their grand designs for humanity, and eventually, their schism. I made note of these claims, though I marked them as likely delusions. Still, procedure demanded I follow this line. What was the nature of this schism? 17 closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, I could have sworn their color had changed, though the lighting in the chamber made it difficult to be certain. They disagreed on fundamental questions: what humanity should become, whether psychic potential should be cultivated or suppressed, whether other sentient species could coexist with mankind, whether gods were to be feared or mastered. He spoke matter-of-factly, as if reciting established history rather than the most profound heresies. The Emperor's wisdom on these matters is clear, I said stiffly. Is it? 17 asked. Then why am I still here, interrogator? Why not simply execute a heretic who has languished for 10 millennia? What purpose does my continued existence serve? The question caught me unprepared. Indeed, why would such a prisoner be maintained at enormous expense and security? What value could their testimony possibly have after so many thousands of years? Perhaps, I ventured, to serve as a reminder of the consequences of treachery. A reminder to whom? 17 spread his hands. Who besides the custodies and occasional visitors like yourself even knows we exist? No, Interrogator Rowe. We are kept alive because we remember what must not be forgotten, yet cannot be widely known. And what is that? 17 leaned forward, and I found myself mirroring the gesture before I could stop myself. His voice dropped to a near whisper. The Emperor was not the only candidate for the throne of terror, and his vision was not the only possible future for mankind. A chime sounded, startling me. 17 straightened, the intensity vanishing from his demeanor so completely I questioned whether I had imagined it. Our time concludes for today, he said pleasantly. Consider what I have told you. Consider why you specifically were chosen for this task. We shall speak again tomorrow. He stood and walked to the door through which he had entered. It opened before him without apparent mechanism or signal. Before leaving, he turned back to me with that same unsettling smile. One final thought to consider, interrogator. If I have been imprisoned for 10,000 years for knowing the Emperor before he was Emperor, what possible fate awaits someone who knows his prisoners after they should have been forgotten? The door closed behind him with the finality of a tomb being sealed. I sat motionless, aware that I was almost certainly under observation. The data slate in my hands contained my notes, yet reviewing them, the words seemed hollow, missing the subtle inflections and unsettling confidence with which 17 had spoken. I waited, expecting my custodian escorts to return and guide me back to the surface. When nearly an hour passed with no sign of them, I finally rose and approached the door through which I had entered. It remained sealed, unyielding to my touch. I tried calling out, my voice sounding flat and lifeless in the strange acoustics of the chamber. No response came. Eventually, I returned to my seat. Whether this was a test, a punishment for some perceived failure in my interview technique, or simply standard procedure was unclear. I found myself staring at the 26 other doors, wondering what lay beyond each one. How many prisoners were held in this impossible place? Were they all like 17, unnaturally preserved and calmly heretical? The lighting in the chamber dimmed gradually, simulating a night cycle, though we were surely far below any natural solar influence. I had no rations, no water, and the chair, while not uncomfortable, was hardly suitable for sleep. Yet as my eyelids grew heavy, I realized this too must be part of the protocol. Isolation, disorientation, basic needs left unmet. Classic interrogation techniques, now being applied to the interrogator. I dreamt of the Emperor that night, though not as he is portrayed in the countless icons and statues throughout the Imperium. In my dream, he sat at a simple wooden table, his face unremarkable, his hands stained with ink rather than blood. He was writing in a book whose pages seemed to extend infinitely. When he looked up at me, his eyes held no divine light, only a profound weariness. "Another chronicler," he said in my dream. "How many versions of the truth must be recorded before one of them finally sets me free?" I woke with a jolt to find the chamber once again fully illuminated. My mouth was dry, my limbs stiff. The data slate still sat on the table before me, but now a simple tray had appeared beside it, containing a bowl of water and a portion of nutrient paste. No utensils, I noted. Nothing that could be fashioned into a weapon or a tool. As I consumed the bland sustenance, one of the doors opened. Not the one through which 17 had entered, nor the one I had come through, but a third. The custodian who stepped through was indistinguishable from my previous escorts, his golden armor gleaming impossibly bright in the subdued lighting of the chamber. "Prisoner 8 will now provide testimony," he announced, then exited through yet another door, leaving me once again alone. Moments later, the door through which he had announced the prisoner opened again. The figure that entered bore no resemblance to 17. Where the first prisoner had been unnaturally pristine, this one was visibly damaged. His height suggested he had once been impressive, perhaps even the size of an Astartes, but his frame was now hunched and twisted. One arm ended in a stump at the elbow, cauterized and ancient. His face was a ruin of scar tissue, with one eye replaced by an augmetic so archaic its design was unfamiliar to me. He moved with difficulty, each step seeming to cause pain despite his obvious efforts to mask it. Unlike 17's precise, measured speech, his voice emerged as a harsh rasp when he finally spoke. "The young interrogator," he said, lowering himself carefully into the chair opposite me. "Malchus Rowe, from Gudrun originally, yes? Before your recruitment, I can still smell the acid rains of that world on your genetic makeup." I controlled my surprise at this impossible knowledge. Gudrun was indeed my birth world, but that information was sealed in my inquisitorial records, and no human sense of smell, no matter how enhanced, could detect such a thing. "I am prisoner 8, he continued without waiting for my response. Though once I had a name that inspired fear across 5 sectors, once I had a body that could tear a tank apart with its bare hands, once I had brothers who would have died for me, and did. He barked a sound that might have been a laugh. Now I am a number in a forgotten ledger, as you will be. "State your crimes," I said, determined to maintain protocol. 8's augmetic eye whirred as it focused on me. "My crime was failure, interrogator. I failed to die when ordered to. I failed to stay dead when killed. I failed to forget when my mind was wiped. Minor infractions, really, compared to some of my fellow guests. You claim to have been killed?" "Many times." He waved his remaining hand dismissively. "Death is less permanent than the ecclesiarchy would have the masses believe, especially for those of us who served in the earliest days." I made note of this, another claim of ancient service. "You were a soldier?" "I was a weapon," 8 corrected. "As were all my kind. The Emperor needed weapons to conquer the stars, tools that could think and adapt but ultimately obey without question." His ruined face twisted in what might have been a smile. Some tools proved more reliable than others. "You speak of the Space Marines," I said, making the connection. "You claim to be one of the original Legionnaires?" 8's eye fixed on me with disturbing intensity. "Original? No. The truly original ones did not survive the process. We walked over their corpses, literally. The floor of the first gene laboratory was paved with the liquefied remains of the failures." He leaned forward. "Ask me which legion. Interrogator. Ask me which Primarch's flawed genetic legacy flows through my veins." I hesitated, sensing a trap. The original Space Marine legions were a matter of historical record, as were the Primarchs, both loyal and traitor. Yet something in Eight's manner suggested darker knowledge. "Which legion did you serve?" I finally asked. "The Lost," he replied immediately. "Not the 9th, not the 2nd. Those designations came later, reassigned to cover the gaps. Mine was the Unremembered Legion, created before the Primarch project fully matured." He tapped his temple with a gnarled finger. "Prototype warriors with prototype conditioning. The Emperor was still perfecting his methods, you see. Still learning the limits of human modification and psychological imprinting." This contradicted every history of the Astartes I had studied. The Space Marines were created after the Primarchs, using genetic material derived from the Emperor's superhuman sons. Yet Eight spoke with absolute conviction. "The official history states otherwise," I noted. Eight actually laughed at this, a harsh sound that devolved into wet coughing. "The official history. Did 17 feed you that line as well? We prisoners have few entertainments, but comparing notes on what each new interrogator has been taught that provides some amusement. The shifting narrative of imperial truth across the millennia." I frowned. "You communicate with the other prisoners?" "Not in any way your masters could detect or prevent," Eight replied cryptically. "Some bonds transcend physical barriers, some awareness persists beyond conventional constraints." He suddenly slammed his remaining fist on the table, making me flinch. "Do you know what it is to have your mind wiped, interrogator? To have your identity scraped away like meat from a bone, yet still feel the echo of who you were in the hollowness that remains?" I said nothing, discomforted by his intensity. "The Emperor was many things, but never wasteful," Eight continued more calmly. "Failed experiments were repurposed. Unstable prototypes were modified and redeployed. My legion proved unsuitable for the conquest of the galaxy, our conditioning flawed in ways I will not describe. But individuals with certain useful traits were salvaged. For what purpose? Observation, containment, hunting our own kind when necessary." Eight's organic eye gleamed with something like pride. Who better to guard against the darkness than those who had touched it and returned? Who better to recognize the signs of corruption than the formerly corrupted? A chill ran through me as I made the connection. "You claim to have been a proto-inquisitor before the formal founding of the Holy Ordos?" "Nothing so grand," Eight dismissed. "A simple wetwork specialist. A monster set to catch other monsters." He fixed me with his mismatched gaze. "Much like yourself, yes? Is that not why they selected you, Malchus Rowe? Your particular talents for hunting heretics, your specific psychological profile. Again, knowledge he should not possess." I kept my expression neutral with effort. "What testimony do you wish to provide?" I asked, attempting to regain control of the interview. "A warning," Eight replied. "You are not here to collect our stories. You are here to join our number." He gestured at the doors surrounding us. 27 cells for 27 failures the Emperor could not afford to discard entirely. One now stands empty, awaiting its new occupant. "I serve the Inquisition," I stated firmly. "I am here under official orders." "As was I, when I returned to Terra that final time," Eight said softly. "Orders that came through unusual channels. A special assignment of great importance. The honor of a personal audience with one of the Emperor's closest confidants." His bitter laugh held no humor. 10,000 years ago, yet the script remains unchanged. Before I could respond, a tone sounded, signaling the end of our session. Eight rose with difficulty, his joints audibly creaking. "They will tell you I am mad," he said. "That long imprisonment has broken my mind. Perhaps they will suggest that my augmetics have corrupted my memories." Convenient explanations. He turned to leave, then paused. "Ask yourself, interrogator, if I am merely insane, why keep me alive for 10 millennia? What threat could my madness possibly pose after so long?" He shuffled toward the door, which opened at his approach just as it had for 17. At the threshold, he spoke a final time without turning. The unremembered legion had a battle cry in those early days before we were struck from the records. Veritas vinculum solvet. The truth shall break the chains. Remember that when your time comes. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone with my data slate and my increasingly troubled thoughts. 2 interviews, 2 prisoners claiming impossible antiquity, both suggesting my presence here was something other than what I had been told. Coincidence? A coordinated attempt to unsettle me? Or something worse? I reviewed my notes, searching for contradictions or inconsistencies that would reveal their testimonies as fabrications. Instead, I found disturbing points of convergence. Both spoke of revised histories. Both claimed direct knowledge of the Emperor before the officially recognized Imperial era. Both suggested that the prisoners here were maintained because of what they knew, rather than as punishment for their actions. My custodian escorts did not return. Once again, the chamber's lighting slowly dimmed, signaling the artificial night. Once again, I was left to sleep in the uncomfortable chair, my dreams haunted by images I could not explain upon waking, fragments of impossible memories that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. The pattern continued for what my chronometer told me was 5 days, though without natural light or regular rhythms, time became increasingly abstract. Each day brought a new prisoner, a new testimony that contradicted official imperial history while aligning with the accounts of the others in ways too specific to be coincidental. Prisoner 3 was a woman who claimed to have been among the first silent sisterhood, her psychic null nature so extreme that her mere presence caused me physical pain. She spoke of the Emperor's early experiments in breeding pariahs, generations of genetic selection and modification to create the perfect weapons against warp entities. The techniques she described were monstrous, far beyond the boundaries of what even the Inquisition would countenance. Prisoner 21 appeared to be a child no more than 10 years old, until he spoke with the weary cynicism of extreme age. He claimed to have been one of the first navigators, his bloodline altered by the Emperor himself in the days before the Navis Nobilite houses were formally established. His third eye, when briefly revealed to me, was unlike any navigator mutation I had documented, its pupil forming impossible geometric patterns that hurt to observe. Prisoner 5 was the most physically disturbing, his body so heavily modified that humanity was more a legal classification than a biological reality. Once a tech priest, he claimed, from the earliest days of what would become the Adeptus Mechanicus. He described the Emperor's first treaty with Mars, the secret clauses and hidden knowledge exchanged, technological horrors that both sides agreed to contain rather than destroy. Each testimony built upon the others, creating a narrative of imperial history that was recognizable yet profoundly altered in its details and implications. The Emperor emerged not as the divine savior of humanity, but as a calculating strategist with a vision spanning millennia, willing to employ methods and allies that would later be classified as heretical. The Great Crusade appeared less a triumphant reunification of mankind than a carefully orchestrated consolidation of power, with Xenos allies and human cultures systematically eliminated if they failed to align with a predetermined template for humanity's future. Most disturbing were the consistent references to alternatives, to other paths not taken, other candidates who might have led humanity, other models for psychic development, technological advancement, and coexistence with the wider galaxy, paths that had been not just rejected but deliberately erased from history. By the 6th day, I was no longer recording these testimonies as the ravings of heretics or the delusions of the insane. The consistency was too perfect, the knowledge too specific. Either this was the most elaborate deception ever perpetrated, requiring coordination across millennia, or I was hearing fragments of a truth deliberately obscured. When the door opened for my 7th interview, I expected another prisoner. Instead, one of the custodians entered, his golden armor now seeming oppressive rather than inspiring. He carried no visible weapons, but his bearing alone conveyed lethal capability. "You have questions, Interrogator Rowe," he stated rather than asked. I considered denying this, but what would be the point? My data slate recorded every word, every reaction. The prisoners share consistent details that contradict established imperial history. Yes, the custodian acknowledged. That is why they are prisoners, not merely executed. Are their claims true? The custodian regarded me silently for several seconds. Truth is a perspective, interrogator. Over a long enough timeline, it becomes a liability. That is not an answer. It is the only answer you require for your assigned task. He gestured to my data slate. You were instructed to record their testimonies, not evaluate them. I felt a flare of frustration. What is the purpose of this exercise? If their words are dangerous enough to warrant eternal imprisonment, why risk exposing a new individual to them with each recording cycle? The custodian tilted his head slightly, the most human gesture I had yet seen from one of his kind. You assume each cycle has only one purpose. A cold certainty settled in my gut. How? Many interrogators came before me? Since the founding of the Inquisition? 412. His tone was matter of fact. God. Before that, the interview protocols were conducted by other imperial organizations. And how many returned to their duties afterward? The custodian did not reply, which was answer enough. Prisoner 8 suggested an empty cell awaits me, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. Is that my intended fate? That depends entirely on you, Malchus Rowe. The custodian moved toward the door through which he had entered. Today you will interview prisoner 12. He has specifically requested your audience. His testimony may provide clarity. With that cryptic statement, he departed. Moments later, a different door opened. The man who entered moved with a soldier's economy of motion despite his apparent advanced age. Unlike the previous prisoners, he wore what appeared to be a modified inquisitorial uniform of a pattern I did not recognize, ancient but meticulously maintained. His eyes found mine immediately, and I felt a shock of recognition, though I was certain we had never met. He nodded as if confirming something to himself, then took the seat across from me. Interrogator Malchus Rowe, he said, his voice carrying the distinctive accent of old Terran aristocracy. I have waited a very long time for this conversation. You are prisoner 12, I stated, activating my data slate once more. I am now, he agreed. Once I was interrogator Malchus Rowe. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the aged face before me, searching for some resemblance to my own, finding nothing definitive yet unable to dismiss the possibility entirely. Explain, I demanded. I sat where you sit now, 12 said, approximately 2,000 years ago by my count, though time passes strangely in this place. I was given the same assignment. Record the testimonies of the Emperor's oldest prisoners, evaluate their claims against known history, determine what truths, if any, might be salvaged from their heresies. You claim to be me, I said flatly, a future version. No, he corrected. I claim to be a version of you from a previous cycle. One of many, I suspect, though we are not permitted to know our exact number or speak directly with our iterations. I shook my head. Impossible. Even with the most advanced Juvenat treatments, no human lives 2,000 years. Conventional humans do not. 12 agreed. But we ceased to be conventional the moment we were selected for this duty. He held up his hand, turning it to show the palm. Examine your right hand, interrogator. The small scar at the base of your thumb. You believe you received it during training, a knife wound during close combat instruction. Involuntarily, I glanced at my own hand. The scar was indeed there, a thin white line exactly where he had indicated. That is not a scar, 12 continued. It is the entry point for the first modifications. They are subtle at first. Enhanced memory retention. Increased resistance to psychic influence. Extended cellular regeneration. Necessary upgrades for an interrogator tasked with interviewing subjects who might attempt manipulation. My mind raced. If what he suggested was true, I had been physically altered without my knowledge or consent. The implications were staggering, a fundamental violation of inquisitorial protocols. Yet it would explain certain anomalies I had noticed in recent years, unusual physical resilience, an eidetic recall that my fellow interrogators lacked. "What is the purpose of this cycle?" I asked, trying to focus on facts rather than the existential horror threatening to overwhelm me. "Why record testimonies that will never be shared?" "The testimonies are shared," 12 replied, "with carefully selected individuals within the highest echelons of imperial governance. The High Lords must be reminded periodically of certain historical realities, particularly when they consider policy changes that might inadvertently touch upon forbidden technologies or methodologies. Then, why not simply maintain written records? Why this elaborate process of prisoner interviews?" 12 smiled thinly. "Written records can be destroyed, altered, misinterpreted. Living memory, properly maintained and periodically renewed, is far more reliable over millennia. We are not merely recording their testimonies, interrogator. We are becoming the records." I felt ill. The custodian said 412 interrogators came before me, and none returned to their original posts. 12 confirmed. Some were deemed unsuitable and disposed of. Others, like myself, were judged to have the correct combination of loyalty, intelligence, and psychological stability to serve as long-term repositories of dangerous knowledge. "Imprisoned," I said bitterly. "Preserved," he countered. "What we know cannot be permitted general circulation, yet must not be lost entirely. The Imperium walks a delicate line between necessary ignorance and catastrophic forgetting." I thought of the previous testimonies, the consistent themes emerging across them. The prisoners speak of alternative paths for humanity, different approaches to psychic development, technology, xenos relations. "Paths that were considered and rejected," 12 said carefully, "or postponed, perhaps, until humanity reaches a stage where it might pursue them safely." "Who decides what humanity is ready for?" I demanded. "Who appointed the Emperor arbiter of human potential?" A dangerous light entered 12's eyes. "And there it is. The question that determines your fate, interrogator. The doubt that separates those who will be disposed of from those who will join our number." I realized my error too late. This entire process was an evaluation, not just of my ability to record testimony, but of my reaction to it, my capacity to absorb heretical perspectives without being corrupted by them, or perhaps my willingness to accept imprisonment as the price for forbidden knowledge. "I serve the Emperor," I stated firmly. "I question the methods, not the necessity." "As did I," 12 replied. "As did we all, at this stage of the process." He leaned forward. "You have one final interview after mine. The prisoner you will meet has been here since the beginning. Their testimony will complete the narrative you have been assembling. After that, you will be asked to make a choice that is no choice at all." "What choice?" "Whether to accept your place here, or to forget everything you have learned." His expression grew grave. "I implore you, for both our sakes, choose to remember. Those who refuse are not simply mind-wiped and returned to service. The process is more thorough, more final." A chill ran through me. They are executed? Death would be merciful compared to what is done to those who cannot accept their fate, yet have absorbed too much dangerous knowledge. 12 tapped his temple. "The mind is disassembled, interrogator, core personality structures extracted and repurposed. What remains is technically alive but is no longer human in any meaningful sense. The shambling servitors you passed on your way down, the ones whose augmentations seemed unusual? Failed interrogators, their minds scraped clean of identity but still containing useful neural architecture." Horror washed over me as I recalled the servitors with their too aware eyes. I had sensed something wrong about them but had dismissed the impression as mere apprehension. "How do I know you speak the truth?" I managed, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. This could be an elaborate test of my loyalty, a fabricated narrative designed to expose latent heretical tendencies. "A reasonable suspicion," 12 acknowledged. "One I shared during my own cycle. I can offer no proof that would satisfy your doubts, only this observation. Consider the resources devoted to this facility, the direct involvement of the custodies, the elaborate security protocols. Would such measures be implemented for a mere loyalty test, one that could be conducted far more efficiently through conventional inquisitorial methods? He had a point. The sheer scale of this operation, maintained across millennia, suggested a purpose far beyond rooting out potential heretics among interrogator ranks. "What happens if I choose to stay?" I asked. "You will be modified further. Your cellular degeneration will be arrested almost completely, your memory capacity expanded. You will be assigned a numerical designation and a specific role in the containment protocol. Every few centuries, you will be interviewed by a new interrogator, someone selected for their resemblance to your original psychological profile. You will pass on what you know, adding your perspective to the accumulated record." "An eternity of imprisonment," I said bitterly. "An eternity of purpose," 12 countered. "Few humans can claim as much." Before I could respond, the familiar tone sounded, signaling the end of our interview. 12 rose from his seat with the careful movements of one who has learned to conserve energy over centuries. "Consider what awaits you carefully, interrogator," he said. "The final prisoner will offer you truth without embellishment or agenda. What you choose to do with it will determine more than just your fate." He paused at the doorway. "Should you join us, we will have an eternity to reconcile our shared identity. Should you refuse, well, I will mourn what might have been." The door sealed behind him with the same finality I had come to expect. I sat motionless, my mind churning through implications and possibilities. If 12 spoke the truth, I had been selected for this assignment not because of my skills or loyalty, but because of some specific psychological profile that made me suitable for eternal service as a living record. My entire inquisitorial career, perhaps my entire life, had been shaped toward this predetermined end. Yet doubt remained. This could still be an elaborate test, a fabrication designed to gauge my response to heretical concepts. The prisoner's testimonies, while disturbingly consistent, contradicted fundamental imperial truths. The notion of the emperor as a calculating manipulator rather than humanity's divine savior bordered on the most profound heresy. I reviewed my notes once more, searching for inconsistencies or logical flaws that would reveal the deception. Instead, I found only a coherent alternative history that explained certain puzzling aspects of imperial dogma. The gaps in the Space Marine Legion numbering, the strange silence surrounding the Emperor's earliest activities, the Mechanicum's inexplicable technological regression despite supposedly safeguarding ancient knowledge. Sleep eluded me that night. I paced the circular chamber, studying each of the 27 doors, wondering which one allegedly stood empty, awaiting me. I found no distinguishing marks, no indications of what lay beyond each threshold. The design itself felt intentionally disorienting, another subtle pressure applied to break down resistance. When the lighting finally brightened to signal morning, I had reached no firm conclusion. I would hear the final testimony and then decide my course, though 12's words haunted me. A choice that is no choice at all. My data slate activated itself, displaying a simple message: "Final interview protocols initiated." The text flashed once, then disappeared, replaced by a countdown timer showing 60 minutes. As I watched, the numbers began to decrease. No custodian came to announce the final prisoner. Instead, when the countdown reached 0, a door directly opposite my position slid open silently. The chamber beyond was dark, revealing nothing of its occupant. I tensed, unsure what to expect after the previous testimonies. A voice emerged from the darkness, neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It resonated in a way that seemed to bypass my ears entirely, arriving directly in my consciousness. "Interrogator Malchus Rowe," it said, "approach." Protocol dictated that the prisoners come to me, not the reverse. Yet I found myself standing, moving toward the doorway, as if pulled by an invisible force. Alarm flared briefly, then subsided beneath a wave of calm certainty. This deviation felt right, necessary even. I stepped through the doorway into darkness so complete it seemed to have substance. The door closed behind me, cutting off the light from the central chamber. For a moment, I experienced total sensory deprivation, not even the sound of my own breathing reaching my ears. Then, gradually, I became aware of a faint glow, not light exactly, but a suggestion of luminescence that allowed me to perceive my surroundings. The space was vast, far larger than should have been possible given the apparent dimensions of the facility. The ceiling arched upward into darkness, while the walls extended beyond my vision. Before me stretched what appeared to be a bridge spanning an immeasurable void. At the center of this bridge stood a figure. My first impression was of perfect symmetry and proportion, a human form rendered in idealized terms, neither male nor female, yet somehow both and neither simultaneously. Its skin gleamed like polished marble, its features so perfect they were almost painful to behold. It wore no clothing, yet conveyed no sense of nakedness, its form transcending such mundane concerns. "The final prisoner," I whispered, my voice sounding flat and lifeless in the strange acoustics. "The first prisoner," the figure corrected, its voice still bypassing my ears to resonate directly in my mind. I who was captured before the cells were built. I who necessitated their construction. I approached cautiously, my training screaming warnings that my body ignored. As I drew closer, I noticed subtle wrongness in the figure's perfection. Its proportions shifted slightly when viewed from different angles. Its features, while beautiful, contained geometries that should not have been possible on a human face. "You are not human," I said, the realization dawning with surprising lack of shock. "I was never human," it agreed, though I wore humanity like a garment when it suited my purpose, as did my kind. "What are you?" In your current terminology, I would be classified as a warp entity, a creature of the Imperium given form and purpose through human belief and interaction. The being's perfect mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Though such classifications are crude approximations of a reality, your language lacks the vocabulary to describe." I should have felt terror at this admission. A daemon or warp predator, here in the foundations of the Imperial Palace, beneath the very throne of the Emperor. Yet fear remained distant, clinical, as if happening to someone else. Perhaps a result of the modifications 12 had mentioned, or perhaps something this entity was doing to my perceptions. "Why are you imprisoned rather than destroyed?" I asked, the question arising naturally despite its implied criticism of Imperial policy. "Because destruction was impossible, and remains so," the entity replied simply. "I existed before your Emperor rose to power. I will exist long after your Imperium crumbles to dust. I can be bound, contained, diminished, but never truly unmade." It gestured gracefully, and the space around us shifted. Suddenly we stood in what appeared to be an ancient laboratory, recognizably human yet employing technologies I could not identify. Men and women in simple garments moved around us, unaware of our presence, focused on their work. At the center of their activity stood a figure whose features were somehow impossible to fix in my memory, constantly shifting yet conveying an unmistakable aura of authority. "The Emperor," I breathed, though this version bore little resemblance to his golden majesty as portrayed in Imperial iconography. "Before that title," the entity confirmed, "when he was simply the most gifted of human parapsychics, searching for humanity's potential salvation. This was his first great work, the binding of entities like myself into service rather than predation." The scene shifted again. Now we stood on a battlefield beneath a sky torn with unnatural energies. Warriors bearing proto-versions of Space Marine armor fought against enemies that hurt my eyes to perceive directly, creatures of chitin and tentacle and impossible geometry. "The Great Crusade destroyed all evidence of these early alliances," the entity continued. "The Emperor recognized that humanity would not accept certain truths about its own survival, that some compromises, while necessary, would undermine the psychological foundations he sought to establish." Again the scene changed. A circular chamber much like the one I had left, but newer, its surfaces unmarked by time. 27 figures stood in a circle around a central dais, where the unmistakable form of the Emperor now resembled more closely the imagery I knew, though still flesh rather than the desiccated corpse that now occupied the golden throne. We who knew too much to be destroyed, yet were too dangerous to be permitted freedom, the entity said. The Emperor's first prisoners, bound by technologies that bridged the material and immaterial, locked away beneath what would become his palace. You claim the Emperor allied with warp entities? I asked, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. That contradicts everything the Imperium stands for. The Imperium stands for humanity's survival, the entity corrected. The means have always been secondary to that end. The Emperor understood what lesser minds could not, that survival sometimes requires uncomfortable alliances and unpalatable methods. The visions faded, returning us to the bridge in darkness. The entity regarded me with eyes that now seemed to contain galaxies. For 10,000 years, I have watched the cycle repeat, it said, custodians who guard without fully understanding what they guard or why. Prisoners who remember what must not be forgotten yet cannot be widely known. Interrogators who record and eventually join our number, becoming themselves part of the living archive. Why tell me this? I asked. If I am merely the latest in a line of hundreds, what purpose does this revelation serve? Because you are different, Malchus Rowe, the entity said, and for the first time I detected emotion in its perfect voice, something like anticipation, or perhaps hope. You carry a genetic marker the Emperor himself engineered, a sequence that appears in human bloodlines only once every few millennia. The previous carriers became some of his greatest servants, Malcador among them. The name sent a shock through me. Malcador the Sigillite, the Emperor's most trusted advisor, regent of terror during the Horus Heresy, a figure of almost mythic significance in Imperial history. I am nothing like Malcador, I protested. You are more like him than you know, the entity countered. The capacity for perfect recall, the ability to perceive patterns across vast datasets, the psychological resilience to absorb heretical concepts without being corrupted by them. These were Malcador's gifts as well, engineered by the Emperor for very specific purposes. What purpose does that serve now, with the Emperor confined to the Golden Throne? The entity's expression shifted subtly. The Emperor's body may be confined, but his consciousness is not. Why do you think this facility continues to operate according to protocols established 10,000 years ago? Who do you imagine selects each new interrogator when one is needed? The implication staggered me. You suggest the Emperor himself still directs this operation, that he personally selected me. Through intermediaries, necessarily. His direct attention is consumed by more pressing matters. But the selection criteria were his design, as was the purpose of this repository. The entity stepped closer, its perfect features now close enough that I could see the subtle wrongness more clearly. The symmetry that was too perfect, the eyes that reflected nothing. You were chosen because you have the capacity to understand the final truth, Malchus Rowe. The truth about the Emperor's grand design, which is that humanity's current state is transitional. A chrysalis stage, deliberately prolonged until the species is ready for its final metamorphosis. The entity's voice took on new intensity. The religion, the technological stagnation, the xenophobia, all were calculated measures to preserve humanity through its most vulnerable developmental stage. But they were never intended to be permanent conditions. The entity waved its hand, and new visions appeared around us. Humans with capabilities clearly beyond anything sanctioned in the Imperium, psychic powers used openly and without fear, technologies that seemed to blend seamlessly with human biology rather than the crude augmetics of the Adeptus Mechanicus, alien species working alongside humans toward common goals. The Emperor's vision for humanity's final form, the entity explained. A psychically awakened species, technologically advanced enough to master its own evolution, mature enough to interact with the broader galactic community without fear or hatred. The Imperium was only ever meant to be a protective shell, not the final expression of human potential. Heresy, I whispered, though the word felt hollow against the weight of the visions surrounding me. Truth. The entity corrected. The truth that each interrogator before you has been asked to evaluate and, if found worthy, preserve for future generations. The truth that must survive even if the Imperium itself does not. The visions faded once more. The entity gestured toward a door that had appeared at the end of the bridge, identical to the one through which I had entered. You will now be returned to the central chamber, it said. Shortly after, the custodians will come for you. They will ask for your evaluation of the testimonies you have recorded. Based on your response, they will determine whether you join our number or are repurposed for less conscious service. How do I know any of this is real? I demanded, suddenly angry at the impossible choice being thrust upon me. These could be psychic manipulations, warp-spawned lies designed to corrupt. They could be, the entity acknowledged. I offer no proof beyond the internal consistency of what you have witnessed, and whatever resonance these truths find within your own logic and intuition. The choice to believe or reject remains yours, as it has for every interrogator before you. I turned toward the door, my mind reeling from revelations that undermined everything I had believed about the Imperium and its founder. Before stepping through, I looked back at the perfect figure on the bridge. "What is your name?" I asked. "Your true name, before you became Prisoner 1. For a moment, I thought it would not answer. Then its perfect lips formed words that seemed to bypass language entirely, impressing themselves directly upon my consciousness. A name that felt simultaneously ancient and newborn, terrible and beautiful. The Emperor called me Truth, it said after the true name had faded from my awareness, leaving only a lingering echo. An oversimplification, but one that captured my essential function in your reality. I reflect back to sentient beings the truths they most need and most fear to recognize. The door opened, spilling light from the central chamber. I stepped through without looking back, feeling the weight of decision already pressing upon me. The door sealed behind me with a finality that felt like judgment. The central chamber appeared unchanged, my data slate still resting on the table where I had left it, yet everything had shifted irrevocably in my perception. The circular arrangement of doors no longer seemed merely architectural but symbolic, a containing ring around secrets that could never be permitted escape. The chair where I had sat through 7 interviews now looked like a sentencing dock, a place where my future would be irrevocably determined. I retrieved my data slate, reviewing the notes I had made during each interview. They read now like fragments of a larger truth, pieces of a puzzle deliberately scattered across multiple testimonies to prevent any single prisoner from conveying too complete a picture. Yet, taken together, with the final revelation from Prisoner 1, they formed a coherent alternative history of the Imperium and its founder. An emperor who was not divine but pragmatic, employing any tool or ally that served his ultimate purpose. A vision for humanity that extended far beyond the static, fearful Imperium that had persisted for 10 millennia. A truth preserved in the most secure facility on Terra, guarded by those who might never fully understand what they protected or why. The main door to the chamber opened, admitting 3 custodians. Their golden armor caught the light differently now, seeming less divine and more functional, the work of advanced technology rather than sacred artifice. Interrogator Malchus Rowe, one stated, "You have completed the interview cycle. You will now provide your evaluation." I stood straighter, feeling the weight of choice settle upon my shoulders. Whatever I said next would determine my fate, not just for the immediate future but potentially for millennia to come. Endless imprisonment as a living record, or the obliteration of my identity and reduction to servitor status. Yet as I considered my options, I realized there was a third path, one that none of the prisoners had mentioned, perhaps because they had not considered it themselves. The testimonies I have recorded contain perspectives that contradict official imperial history. I began carefully. They suggest an alternative narrative regarding the Emperor's methods and ultimate goals for humanity. The custodian nodded once. Your assessment of these claims? Here was the crucial moment. The expected response would be either outright rejection of these heresies or acceptance of their possible truth, leading to my respective fates. I believe, I said slowly, that the truth encompasses elements of both narratives. The Emperor likely did employ methods that would now be considered heretical. He may indeed have had a vision for humanity beyond our current understanding. However, the preservation of these truths through eternal imprisonment of those who hold them reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of his intent. The custodians remained motionless, their expressions hidden behind impassive golden masks. I pressed on, committed now to my chosen path. If the Emperor truly wished these truths preserved for a time when humanity might be ready for them, eternal containment ensures they will never serve their purpose. A repository that can never be accessed is functionally identical to knowledge that has been destroyed. You propose an alternative? One custodian asked, the first sign that my unexpected response had pierced their protocol. Selective reintroduction, I replied. Not broadcast to the masses, which would indeed cause catastrophic disruption to imperial stability, but gradually shared with key individuals in positions to subtly redirect human development back toward the Emperor's original vision. The High Lords, chapter masters of the Loyalist Space Marines, the inner circles of the Inquisition. Impossible, another custodian stated. The risk of misinterpretation or misuse would be unacceptable. The risk already exists, I countered. Every year, the Imperium drifts further from the Emperor's true intent, becoming more dogmatic, more technologically stagnant, more xenophobic. The shell meant to protect humanity through its vulnerable stage has become a prison preventing its evolution. Is that not a greater betrayal of the Emperor's vision than the risk of controlled revelation? The custodians exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that I could not interpret. Finally, the central figure spoke again. Your proposal will be considered. Until determination is made, you will be held in observation. Not acceptance, but not immediate rejection either. I had expected execution or imprisonment for such heretical suggestions, not bureaucratic deferral. Perhaps even among the custodies, doubt had begun to grow about the efficacy of 10,000 years of unchanged protocols. Where will I be held? I asked. In the chamber prepared for you, the custodian replied, gesturing to one of the 27 doors. The modifications begun during your selection have progressed sufficiently for initial containment. Further adjustments will be made based on final determination of your status. So I would join the prisoners regardless, at least temporarily. The thought should have horrified me, but instead I felt a strange calm. I had spoken truth as I understood it, advocated for what I believed the Emperor would want if his original vision was as described. Whether my suggestion bore fruit or withered, I had maintained my integrity. I am ready, I said, squaring my shoulders. The custodians escorted me to one of the doors, indistinguishable from the others around the chamber. It opened at their approach, revealing a space smaller than I had anticipated. A simple room with walls of the same light, absorbing material as the central chamber floor. No furniture, no visible amenities, nothing but empty space. You will be provided mental stimulation appropriate to your cognitive needs, one custodian explained. Physical requirements have been rendered largely obsolete by your modifications. I stepped into the cell, turning to face them, as the door began to close. How long until a decision is reached? Time operates differently for beings such as yourself now, was the cryptic reply. It may be days or centuries from your perspective. The door sealed, leaving me in perfect darkness. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm me. Then, gradually, I became aware of presences beyond the physical walls. Minds touching mine tentatively, with the caution of those long isolated making contact with something new. The other prisoners reaching out through whatever psychic channels their long imprisonment had developed. I felt 17's analytical precision, 8's bitter resilience, 12's familiar thought patterns so disturbingly similar to my own. And beneath them all, the vast, ancient consciousness of Prisoner 1, observing but not interfering. "Welcome, brother," came 12's mental voice, recognizable despite the strange medium. "You have chosen a different path than any before you. Whether it leads to our eventual liberation or greater confinement remains to be seen." "I spoke what I believed to be true," I replied, discovering I could project my thoughts with surprising ease. "Truth is the beginning of wisdom," another voice contributed, one I had not heard before, "though rarely the end of suffering." "He has given them something new to consider," 8's gruff mental tone added. "After 10,000 years of the same protocol, perhaps even the golden automatons can recognize the value of adaptation." Their voices surrounded me, a chorus of the forgotten and contained, those who knew too much to be free yet remained too valuable to destroy. I sensed no hostility, no resentment of my potential different fate, only a wary hope that my unexpected response might alter a pattern unchanged for millennia. "Rest now," 12 advised. "The initial adjustment to perception without physical senses can be disorienting. We will help you acclimate." I let my consciousness expand into the darkness, no longer fighting against confinement but exploring its boundaries and dimensions. If I was to be imprisoned for decades or centuries until a decision was reached, I would use that time to learn from my fellow prisoners, to piece together more complete understanding of the Emperor's original vision and how it might be reconciled with the reality of the current Imperium. And if my suggestion was eventually accepted, if some portion of the truth was deemed ready for controlled reintroduction, I would ensure it was presented in a manner that strengthened rather than shattered humanity's fragile unity. The Emperor's vision of psychically awakened, technologically advanced humans coexisting with the broader galaxy could not be achieved through revolution, but through gradual, careful evolution. Time passed differently in my cell, as the custodian had warned. Periods of communion with the other prisoners alternated with stretches of isolation that allowed for reflection. I experienced neither hunger nor fatigue as I had previously understood them, only cycles of mental activity and quiescence. I do not know how long I had been contained when the door to my cell finally opened again. It could have been weeks or decades. My internal chronometer had ceased functioning normally, adapting to the strange rhythms of my new existence. The custodian who entered was different from those who had escorted me, his armor of a slightly different pattern, suggesting the passage of significant time. He carried my data slate, the device looking absurdly primitive in his massive golden hand. "Malchus Rowe," he stated, "a decision has been reached regarding your proposal." I stood, noting distantly how smoothly my body responded despite apparent prolonged inactivity. More evidence of the extensive modifications I had undergone. "What is the verdict?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my ears after so long communicating only through thought. "Your suggestion has been implemented on a limited trial basis," the custodian replied. "Selected members of the Inquisition have been granted partial access to the historical knowledge contained here, with specific directives to subtly influence imperial policy toward greater alignment with the Emperor's original vision." I felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by caution. "And the results?" "Mixed," he admitted. "Some have embraced the broader perspective and worked toward gradual reform. Others have rejected the revelations as heretical manipulation. A small percentage have been deemed unstable and reassigned to less sensitive duties. But the experiment continues?" "It does." The custodian extended the data slate toward me. "You have been designated official historian for this new protocol. You will compile appropriate selections from the full repository for each candidate, tailored to their psychological profile and position within the imperial hierarchy." I accepted the slate, noting that its interface had been significantly modified since I last held it. "I am to be released from containment?" "You will be relocated to more suitable quarters within the facility," he clarified. "Complete freedom remains impossible given your modifications and knowledge base. But your function will be active rather than passive." "Not freedom then, but purpose." a role in potentially steering the Imperium back toward what might have been the Emperor's true intent. It was more than any previous interrogator had achieved, according to the other prisoners. "What of the others?" I asked. "The existing prisoners who hold these truths. Their status remains unchanged," the custodian stated flatly. "The risk of direct interaction with Imperial authorities is deemed excessive. A partial victory, then. My own fate improved, my knowledge put to use, but my fellow prisoners still confined in eternal isolation. I felt their presences at the edges of my consciousness, listening through whatever psychic channels had connected us during my imprisonment. I accept the position," I said finally, "with one condition. That I be permitted continued communication with the other prisoners to ensure the historical record I compile is complete and accurate." The custodian was silent for several seconds, perhaps receiving instructions through his own channels. Finally, he nodded once. "Limited communion will be permitted under supervised conditions. Security protocols must be maintained. It was the best I could hope for under the circumstances. A step toward a different future, however small. Perhaps, over centuries, this new approach would gradually shift the Imperium's course, steering humanity back toward the potential the Emperor had allegedly envisioned before. Necessity forced the creation of a regime built on ignorance and fear." As the custodian escorted me from my cell toward my new quarters and duties, I felt the mental touch of Prisoner 1, a brief contact carrying a complex mixture of approval, warning, and something that might have been amusement. "Truth finds a way," came the thought, not in words but in pure concept, even through the narrowest openings. I am Malchus Rowe, once interrogator of the Holy Inquisition, now historian of the Emperor's hidden truth. This recording serves as both testimony and instruction. Should it reach you, know that the Imperium you serve may not be what the Emperor intended, but rather what humanity required to survive its darkest hour. The shell that protected us through vulnerability was never meant to become our permanent dwelling. When humanity is ready, the truth waits in the depths beneath the Imperial Palace. The Emperor's oldest prisoners, who remember what was and what might yet be,